I smoothed my apron and took a deep breath, savoring the aroma of freshly baked apple pie. The kitchen was my sanctuary, a place where I could create something beautiful for my family. As I pulled the golden brown crust from the oven, I heard the front door open. "Julie? I'm home." Mark's voice echoed through the house. "In the kitchen, honey," I called back, setting the pie on the cooling rack. Mark appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened and a strange expression on his face. I felt a twinge of unease. "Everything okay?" I asked, wiping my hands on a dish towel. He hesitated, then blurted out, "My parents are moving in with us." The words hit me like a bucket of ice water. "What? When did this happen?" "Dad called this morning. They're selling the house and, well, they need a place to stay." I gripped the counter, my mind reeling. "And you agreed without talking to me first?" Mark ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't have much choice, Julie. They're my parents." "They're also the people who've criticized every decision we've made since we got married," I reminded him, my voice rising. "Your mother can barely stand to be in the same room as me." "That's not true," Mark protested weakly. "When are they coming?" I demanded. He winced. "Next week." "Next week?" I exploded. "Mark, we have a 2-year-old. Where are we supposed to put them?" As if on cue, Lucy's cry pierced the air from upstairs. I closed my eyes, trying to steady myself. "We'll figure it out," Mark said, reaching for me. I stepped back, shaking my head. "No, you'll figure it out. This is your mess." I untied my apron and tossed it on the counter. "I need to check on Lucy." I brushed past him, my mind racing. How could he do this without consulting me? As I climbed the stairs, memories of past encounters with Claire, Mark's mother, flooded back. Her disapproving glances, her not-so-subtle jabs about my housekeeping and parenting skills. And now she'd be living under our roof? Lucy was standing in her crib, tears streaming down her chubby cheeks. I scooped her up, inhaling her sweet baby scent. "It's okay, sweetie," I murmured, more to myself than to her. "Mommy's here." I heard Mark's footsteps on the stairs and tensed. He appeared in the doorway, his face a mix of guilt and frustration. "Julie, can we talk about this?" I turned to face him, Lucy on my hip. "What's there to talk about? You've already made the decision." "They're family," he insisted. "We can't just leave them without a place to live." "And what about our family?" I shot back. "What about the life we've built here?" Mark sighed. "It's temporary, just until they find a new place." I laughed bitterly. "You really believe that, once your mother gets her claws in, she'll never leave?" "That's not fair," Mark protested. "No, what's not fair is you making this decision without me." I bounced Lucy gently, trying to calm her. "If they move in, you need to promise me something." "Anything," Mark said quickly. I met his gaze, my voice steel. "You stand up for me. When your mother starts in with her criticism and her judgments, you have my back. Can you do that?" Mark hesitated, and in that moment, I saw our future unraveling before my eyes. The happy life we'd built, the dreams we'd shared, all of it threatened by this one decision. "I'll try," he finally said. It wasn't the answer I wanted, and we both knew it. As I turned back to Lucy's crib, laying her down gently, I felt a resolve hardening within me. If Mark wouldn't protect our family, I would. No matter what it took. The week flew by in a blur of anxiety and resentment. I threw myself into preparing for Mark's parents' arrival, scrubbing every surface until it gleamed and rearranging furniture to make space. But no amount of cleaning could erase the dread that settled in my stomach like a lead weight. On moving day, I stood on the porch, watching as Robert's car pulled into the driveway. Mark squeezed my hand, but I couldn't bring myself to return the gesture. "Here we go," he murmured. Claire emerged from the passenger seat, her critical gaze sweeping over our modest home. I steeled myself as she approached, plastering on a smile that felt more like a grimace. "Julie, dear," she said, air-kissing my cheek. "I do hope you've made space in the kitchen. I've brought my own cookware." And there it was, the first jab. I bit back a retort, reminding myself to pick my battles. "Of course, Claire," I managed. "Whatever makes you comfortable." As we helped them unload, memories of past encounters with Claire flooded back. The time she'd reorganized my kitchen during a visit, claiming I didn't know how to properly stock a pantry. The snide comments about my career choices, implying I was neglecting my family by working part-time. Each recollection stoked the fire of resentment burning in my chest. That night, as Mark and I lay in bed, I turned to face him. Remember what you promised, I said quietly. He sighed. Julie, they've only been here a day. Give it time. Time for what? I hissed. For your mother to completely take over our lives. That's not fair, Mark protested. They're just trying to adjust. I sat up, frustration boiling over. And what about us? What about Lucy? When do we get to adjust to having our lives turned upside down? Mark reached for me, but I shrugged off his touch. I need you to have my back, I insisted. When your mother starts in with her criticism, and she will, I need you to stand up for me, for us. He hesitated, and in that pause, I felt the chasm between us widening. I'll try, he finally said, echoing his weak promise from a week ago. I lay back down, turning away from him. Trying isn't enough, Mark. Not anymore. The next morning, I woke to the sound of pots clanging in the kitchen. I found Claire at the stove, whisking eggs with a disapproving frown. Oh, Julie, she said, eyeing my pajamas. I didn't realize you were sleeping in. I thought I'd make a proper breakfast for once. I clenched my jaw, counting to 10 before responding. That's thoughtful of you, Claire, but I usually handle breakfast for Lucy. Well, you've been doing it wrong, she declared, brandishing her whisk. A growing child needs more than those sugary cereals you feed her. Before I could retort, Mark appeared, Lucy in his arms. Morning, everyone, he said cheerfully, seemingly oblivious to the tension. I waited for him to say something, to defend our parenting choices, but he just settled Lucy into her high chair and accepted a plate from his mother with a smile. This looks great, Mom, he said. Doesn't it, Julie? I stared at him, disbelief and betrayal coursing through me. This was exactly what I'd feared, what I'd warned him about, and he was already falling into old patterns, choosing the path of least resistance. I'm not hungry, I said flatly, turning on my heel. As I retreated to our bedroom, I heard Claire's voice floating up the stairs. My goodness, Mark, is she always this sensitive? I waited for Mark's response, for him to finally stand up to his mother, but only silence followed. In that moment, something inside me hardened. I'd given Mark a chance, more than one, to prove he could balance his loyalty to me with his relationship with his parents, and he'd failed. As I sank onto the bed, my mind raced with possibilities. If Mark wouldn't protect our family, our life together, then I would have to take matters into my own hands, no matter what it took. 2 weeks into our new living arrangement, I felt like I was drowning. Every corner of our home now bore Claire's touch, from the rearranged furniture to the constant aroma of her cooking. I'd retreated to the sanctuary of Lucy's room, desperate for a moment of peace, when I heard the front door open. Hello? Anyone home? A familiar voice called out, sending a chill down my spine. I rushed downstairs to find Linda, Mark's sister, standing in our living room, surrounded by suitcases. Linda? I stammered. What are you doing here? She flashed me a saccharine smile. Oh, didn't Mark tell you? I'm moving in too. The room spun. I gripped the banister, struggling to breathe. No, I managed. He didn't mention it. Well, surprise, Linda chirped, oblivious to my distress. Mom and Dad said there was plenty of room, and I just couldn't pass up the opportunity for some quality family time. As if summoned, Claire appeared from the kitchen, beaming at her daughter. Linda, darling, you're early. I watched in stunned silence as they embraced, chattering excitedly about Linda's new job in town and how wonderful it would be to all be together again. Julie, Claire said, finally acknowledging my presence. Be a dear and help Linda with her bags. We'll put her in the guest room. The guest room? I echoed weakly. But that's where you and Robert are staying. Claire waved a dismissive hand. Oh, we'll move to Lucy's room. She can bunk with you and Mark for now. It'll be cozy. My vision blurred with angry tears. This was too much. Without a word, I turned and fled upstairs, slamming our bedroom door behind me. I was still shaking with rage when Mark came home an hour later. He found me furiously folding laundry, clothes flying into piles. Hey, he said cautiously. I saw Linda downstairs. I guess she arrived early. I whirled on him. You knew about this? He had the grace to look sheepish. I was going to tell you, but I didn't want to upset you more than you already have. I cut him off. Mark, this is our home, our life, and you're letting your entire family take it over without even consulting me. Julie, please, he pleaded. It's temporary. Linda just needs a place to stay while she gets settled in her new job. And Lucy, I demanded, Where is our daughter supposed to sleep now that your parents are taking over her room? Mark ran a hand through his hair, a gesture I once found endearing, but now only irritated me. We'll figure it out. Maybe we can set up a little bed in here for her. I stared at him, disbelief etched on my face. Do you even hear yourself? This isn't a solution, Mark. This is chaos. What do you want me to do? He snapped, his patience finally wearing thin. They're my family. And what are we? I shot back, gesturing between us. Aren't we your family too? Before he could respond, a knock at the door interrupted us. Linda poked her head in, her smile faltering as she sensed the tension. Sorry to interrupt, she said, not sounding sorry at all. But Mom wants to know if you're joining us for dinner, Julie. She's made her famous pot roast. I closed my eyes, counting to 10 before I trusted myself to speak. No, thank you. I'm not feeling well. As Linda retreated, I turned back to Mark. This can't go on, I said quietly. Something has to change. He reached for me, but I stepped back. Julie, please, give it time, we'll adjust. But as I looked into his eyes, I saw only uncertainty and weakness. In that moment, I realized that the man I married, the partner I thought I had, was slipping away. No, Mark, I said, my voice steady despite the turmoil inside. I don't think we will. As I brushed past him and out of the room, leaving him standing alone, I felt something shift inside me. The last threads of hope I'd been clinging to began to unravel, replaced by a cold determination. If Mark wouldn't fight for our family, then I would, and I'd do whatever it took to reclaim the life that was being stolen from us, piece by piece. The days blurred together in a haze of tension and barely contained resentment. I felt like a stranger in my own home, tiptoeing around Claire's constant criticism and Linda's snide remarks. Mark, true to form, remained frustratingly neutral, always quick to change the subject when conflicts arose. One afternoon, I was folding laundry in the living room when I overheard Claire and Linda in the kitchen. I don't know how Mark puts up with her, Linda's voice drifted through the door. Did you see how she snapped at him this morning? Well, dear, Claire replied, her tone dripping with false sympathy. Some women just aren't cut out for the demands of family life. It's a shame, really. Mark deserves better. My hands shook as I gripped the laundry basket. I waited for Mark to defend me, to say anything at all. But his voice never came. Unable to contain myself any longer, I stormed into the kitchen. If you have something to say about me, say it to my face, I snapped. Claire's eyes widened in faux innocence. Julie, dear, we were just concerned about you. You seem so stressed lately. Gee, I wonder why, I retorted, my voice dripping with sarcasm. Could it be because my home has been invaded by people who can't stop criticizing every move I make? Linda gasped dramatically. How dare you speak to Mom that way? Mark, are you going to let her talk to us like this? I whirled around to find Mark standing in the doorway, his face a mask of discomfort. Mark, I pleaded, please, say something. Stand up for me for once. He looked between me and his family, conflict evident in his eyes. I think everyone just needs to calm down, he said weakly. In that moment, something inside me snapped. Calm down? I echoed incredulously. That's all you have to say? Julie, please, Mark started, but I cut him off. No, Mark, I'm done. I'm done being the villain in this story. I'm done being the one who has to tiptoe around everyone's feelings while mine are completely disregarded. I turned to Claire and Linda, and I'm done pretending that this arrangement is working. It's not. It never was. Claire's face hardened. Well, if that's how you feel, perhaps it's best if you... If I what? I challenged. Leave? This is my home. I'm not going anywhere. Mom, Dad, Mark interjected, finally finding his voice. Maybe we should talk about finding you and Linda your own place. I felt a flicker of hope, quickly extinguished by Claire's next words. Nonsense, she said firmly. We're family. We stick together. Julie's the one who needs to adjust her attitude. I looked at Mark, silently begging him to stand his ground, but I saw the moment he caved, his shoulders slumping in defeat. We'll figure something out, he mumbled, not meeting my eyes. In that moment, I realized that the man I married, the partner I thought I had, was gone. In his place stood a stranger, unwilling or unable to fight for our family. I turned and walked out of the kitchen, ignoring their calls behind me. In our bedroom, the only space left that felt like mine, I sank onto the bed, my mind racing. For weeks, I'd been holding on to hope that things would improve, that Mark would step up and set boundaries with his family. But now, Faced with the harsh reality of his continued inaction, I knew I had to make a choice. I couldn't continue living like this, constantly under attack in my own home, and I couldn't subject Lucy to this toxic environment. As much as it pained me to admit it, I was starting to see only one way out. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and searched for divorce lawyers in our area. As I stared at the search results, a mix of fear and determination washed over me. This wasn't the future I'd envisioned for us, but I refused to be a victim any longer. If Mark wouldn't fight for our family, then I would fight for myself and Lucy. Whatever it took. The shrill ring of my phone cut through the tense silence of the house. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my heart skip a beat. It was my sister, Sarah. "Julie." Her voice trembled on the other end. "It's Dad. He's in the hospital." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. "What happened?" I managed to ask, gripping the phone tightly. "Heart attack. They're saying it's serious. You need to come home." I ended the call, my mind racing. I had to go, had to be there for my father. But as I turned to pack a bag, I came face to face with Claire, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. "And where do you think you're going?" she demanded. I took a deep breath, steeling myself. "My father's in the hospital. I need to leave immediately." Claire's lips thinned into a disapproving line. "Now? But we have the charity gala tonight. The whole family is expected to attend." "My father could be dying," I said incredulously. "I don't care about some gala." "Well, you should," Claire snapped. "It's important to Mark's career. Surely your father can wait a day or two." White-hot anger surged through me. "No, he can't, and I'm going, with or without your approval." I brushed past her, heading for our bedroom. As I threw clothes into a suitcase, Mark appeared in the doorway. "Julie, what's going on? Mom said something about you leaving." I explained the situation rapidly, zipping up my bag. "I have to go, Mark. Tonight?" He ran a hand through his hair, looking conflicted. "But the gala, my boss will be there. It's a big opportunity for me." I stared at him, disbelief and disappointment warring within me. "Are you serious right now? My father is in the hospital, and you're worried about a work function?" "Of course not," he backpedaled. "It's just, can't you leave in the morning? We could go to the gala tonight and then—" "No," I cut him off, my voice hard. "I'm leaving now. You can stay here with your precious family if that's what's most important to you." As I moved to leave, Claire appeared, blocking the doorway. "You're being selfish, Julie. This isn't just about you. Think of what you're doing to this family." Something inside me snapped. "Family?" I laughed bitterly. "You want to talk about family? Let me tell you something about family. Family supports each other. Family doesn't criticize and belittle at every turn. Family doesn't force their way into someone's home and then try to push them out." I turned to Mark, my eyes blazing. "And family certainly doesn't stand by silently while their spouse is treated like dirt." "Julie, please," Mark started, but I held up a hand. "No, I'm done. I'm going to be with my real family, the people who actually care about me." I pushed past Claire, ignoring her indignant sputtering. As I reached the front door, Linda emerged from the kitchen, a smug smile on her face. "Running away, Julie? I always knew you couldn't handle the pressure of being part of our family." I paused, my hand on the doorknob. In that moment, looking at their smug, self-righteous faces, something crystallized within me. This wasn't just about visiting my father. This was about reclaiming my life, my dignity. "You're right, Linda," I said, my voice steady. "I can't handle being part of this family, because this isn't a family. It's a toxic, manipulative mess, and I'm done with all of it." I walked out, slamming the door behind me. As I drove away, my hands shaking on the steering wheel, I felt a strange mix of fear and exhilaration. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for certain. I couldn't go back to the way things were. As the miles stretched between me and the house that had become my prison, a plan began to form in my mind. This wasn't just about escaping anymore. It was about taking back control, and if that meant playing their game, if that meant revenge, then so be it. They had no idea what was coming. I returned home after a week at my father's bedside, emotionally drained but resolute. The house was eerily quiet as I stepped inside, bracing myself for the inevitable confrontation. Instead, I found Linda in the living room, practically vibrating with excitement. "Julie, you're back just in time for the big news." Before I could respond, she thrust her left hand in my face, a gaudy diamond ring glittering on her finger. "I'm engaged." Can you believe it? For a moment, I stood there, stunned. Then, as if on cue, Claire swept into the room, beaming with pride. Isn't it wonderful, Julie? Our Linda finally settling down with such a nice young man. I forced a smile, my mind racing. Congratulations, Linda. That's quite a surprise. Oh, you haven't even met Steve yet, Linda gushed. He's just perfect. We're having an engagement party next week, and you simply must help us plan it. As Linda prattled on about flower arrangements and guest lists, I caught sight of Mark hovering in the doorway, his expression unreadable. Our eyes met, and I saw a flicker of something. Regret? Uncertainty? Before I could decipher it, he looked away. Over the next few days, the house was a flurry of activity as preparations for the engagement party took over. I found myself relegated to the sidelines, watching as Claire and Linda took charge, their excitement a stark contrast to the tension that still simmered beneath the surface. It was during one of these planning sessions that I overheard a conversation that made my blood run cold. I can't believe how well this is working out, Linda's voice drifted from the kitchen. Once Steve and I are married, we'll have even more reason to stay here. Julie won't be able to complain about us taking over then. Claire's smug reply made my stomach churn. Exactly, dear. And with you here to help, we can finally show Mark what a real family looks like. He'll forget all about Julie's little tantrums in no time. I stumbled back, my heart pounding. This wasn't just about Linda's engagement. This was a calculated move to push me out completely. As I retreated to my room, my mind whirled with a mix of anger and desperation. I couldn't let them win, couldn't let them destroy everything I'd built, but how could I fight back against a united front of Mark's family? The answer came in the form of a chance encounter. I was at the grocery store, mindlessly pushing my cart down the aisle, when I quite literally ran into a tall, handsome stranger. I'm so sorry, I stammered, bending to pick up the items I'd knocked from his basket. No harm done, he replied with a warm smile. I'm Steve, by the way. I froze, realization dawning. This was Linda's fiancé, the man unwittingly being drawn into our family's toxic web. In that moment, a plan began to form in my mind. It was risky, perhaps even cruel, but I was out of options. If I couldn't make Mark see reason, maybe I could open Steve's eyes to the truth before it was too late. It's nice to meet you, Steve, I said, extending my hand. I'm Julie, Linda's sister-in-law. His eyes lit up with recognition. Oh, I've heard so much about you. Linda says you're helping with the engagement party planning. I nodded, a plan solidifying in my mind. Actually, I was hoping to talk to you about that. There's something you should know before you commit to this family. Steve's brow furrowed with concern. What do you mean? I took a deep breath, steeling myself for what I was about to do. It's a long story, but trust me, it's one you need to hear. Can we grab a coffee? As Steve nodded, agreeing to hear me out, I felt a mix of guilt and determination wash over me. This was it, my chance to expose the truth and maybe, just maybe, save myself and my marriage in the process. But as we walked towards the cafe, a nagging voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. Was I really prepared for the consequences of what I was about to do? My heart raced as I stood in the corner of the crowded living room watching the engagement party unfold. Linda flitted from guest to guest, her diamond ring catching the light, while Claire beamed with pride. Mark hovered nearby, a forced smile plastered on his face. Steve caught my eye from across the room, and I gave him a slight nod. It was time. I'd spent the past week agonizing over my decision, torn between guilt and determination. But after our coffee shop conversation, where I'd shared some of the milder examples of Claire and Linda's behavior, Steve had been eager to learn more. He couldn't quite believe the sweet, charming women he knew could be so different behind closed doors. That's when I'd made my move. I have proof, I'd told him, my voice barely above a whisper. If you really want to know the truth, come to the engagement party. I'll show you who they really are. Now, as the party reached its peak, I slipped out of the room and made my way to the study. Steve followed a few minutes later, closing the door behind him. Are you sure about this, Julie? He asked, his brow furrowed with concern. I nodded, my mouth dry. You deserve to know what you're getting into. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and pressed play on the recording I'd captured just days earlier. Claire's voice filled the room, dripping with disdain. That Julie, she's never been good enough for Mark. Always so selfish, putting her own needs first, and now she's trying to turn Lucy against us. Linda's laughter joined in. Don't worry, Mom. Once Steve and I are married, we'll have even more reason to stay here. We'll show Mark what a real family looks like. Julie won't stand a chance. Steve's face paled as the recording continued, revealing more of Claire and Linda's true nature. Their constant criticism, their manipulative tactics, their plans to push me out of my own home. When it finally ended, Steve slumped into a chair, his head in his hands. I can't believe it, he murmured. They seemed so different. They're very good at putting on a show, I said softly, but this is who they really are. Before Steve could respond, the door burst open. Linda stood there, her face flushed with anger. What's going on here? She demanded. Steve stood up, his expression hardening. We need to talk, Linda. Now. As they left the room, I felt a mixture of relief and dread wash over me. I'd done it. I'd revealed the truth. But at what cost? I made my way back to the party, my heart pounding. The room had gone eerily quiet, all eyes on Linda and Steve as they argued in hushed, heated tones near the fireplace. Claire hovered nearby, her face a mask of concern. Suddenly, Steve's voice rose above the murmur of the crowd. It's over, Linda. I can't marry someone who would treat their own family like this. A collective gasp rippled through the room. Linda's face crumpled, tears streaming down her cheeks. But Steve, I don't understand. Ask your mother, Steve said coldly, turning to leave. Ask her about the things you've said about Julie, about your plans to push her out. I've heard it all. As Steve stormed out, all hell broke loose. Linda collapsed into sobs. Claire rushed to comfort her, and the guests began to whisper and point. And then, in the midst of the chaos, Mark's eyes found mine. The look of betrayal and anger on his face made my blood run cold. What have you done? He hissed, grabbing my arm and pulling me into the hallway. I wrenched away from him, left my own anger flaring. I did what you should have done months ago, I shot back. I stood up for myself, for our family. Mark's face contorted with rage. Our family? You've just destroyed our family. As the sounds of Linda's sobs and Claire's attempts to salvage the situation drifted from the living room, I realized there was no going back. I'd lit the match, and now everything was going up in flames. No, Mark, I said, my voice steady despite the trembling in my hands. You destroyed our family the moment you chose them over us. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving Mark standing in the hallway, surrounded by the wreckage of the life we'd once shared. As I climbed the stairs to pack my bags, I knew that the real battle was just beginning. The weeks following the disastrous engagement party were a blur of heated arguments, tearful conversations, and sleepless nights. But as I stood in our, now my living room, surrounded by packed boxes, I felt a strange sense of calm. Are you sure about this, Julie? Sarah asked, cradling Lucy in her arms. I nodded, taking a deep breath. It's time. I can't live like this anymore. The sound of a key in the lock made us both freeze. Mark walked in, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. He stopped short when he saw the boxes. So this is it? He said, his voice barely above a whisper. This is it, I confirmed, steeling myself for the confrontation I knew was coming. Mark's face crumpled. Julie, please, we can work this out. I'll ask them to leave. It's too late for that. I cut him off. You've had months to choose us, to stand up for our family, but you didn't, and I can't keep waiting for you to be the husband and father we need. As if on cue, Claire's voice drifted down from upstairs. Mark? Is that Julie? Tell her Linda needs help with the... Not now, Mom. Mark shouted, his frustration finally boiling over. The silence that followed was deafening. I picked up my suitcase, nodding to Sarah to bring Lucy. We're leaving now, Mark. My lawyer will be in touch about the divorce proceedings. Divorce? Mark's voice cracked. Julie, no. Please, let's talk about this. For a moment, I hesitated. The look of desperation in his eyes almost made me waver. But then I thought of all the times I'd begged him to stand up for me, all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep feeling alone in my own home. We're done talking, I said firmly. It's time for action. As we walked out the door, I heard Claire and Linda's voices, demanding to know what was happening. Mark's anguished reply faded as we drove away, Lucy babbling happily in her car seat, oblivious to the monumental change taking place. The months that followed were challenging, to say the least. The divorce proceedings were messy. with Claire and Linda trying to paint me as an unfit mother. But I stood my ground, armed with evidence of their behavior and supported by friends who had witnessed their treatment of me over the years. To my surprise, it was Mark who finally put an end to their interference. In a moment of clarity, during a heated courtroom exchange, he stood up and addressed the judge directly. "Your Honor, I've been blind to the truth for too long," he said, his voice shaking. "Julie is an excellent mother, and she deserves better than what I and my family have put her through. I won't contest her custody claim." His words, though late in coming, lifted a weight from my shoulders. As we left the courthouse that day, divorce papers finalized and custody agreement in hand, Mark approached me. "I'm sorry, Julie," he said, his eyes filled with regret, "for everything. I hope someday you can forgive me." I nodded, not quite ready to absolve him, but appreciating the gesture. "Take care of yourself, Mark, and maybe think about getting some distance from your family, for your own sake." As I watched him walk away, I felt a chapter of my life closing. But rather than sadness, I felt a surge of hope for the future. Now, a year later, I stand in the kitchen of my new home, watching Lucy play in the backyard. The sound of her laughter fills the air, untainted by criticism or manipulation. I think back to the woman I was, so desperate to keep her family together that she lost herself in the process. That woman is gone, replaced by someone stronger, wiser, and fiercely protective of the life she's built. I hear from Sarah that Mark has finally moved out of his parents' house, seeking therapy to address the years of manipulation. Claire and Linda, I'm told, are struggling to accept the new dynamic. Part of me feels a twinge of satisfaction at their discomfort, but mostly I'm just grateful to have escaped their toxic influence. As I join Lucy in the yard, reveling in the simple joy of playing with my daughter, I realize that this moment of pure, uncomplicated happiness is the revenge I truly wanted all along. Not to hurt them, but to free myself, to build a life filled with love, respect, and peace. And as Lucy runs into my arms, her face beaming with trust and adoration, I know that I've finally won the battle that truly matters.